So, to kick things off, I'll first introduce our moderator for today, our very own Dr. Melvin George. He's our Chief Medical Officer here at InoRX, and he brings extensive experience across clinical pharmacology, academic research, and global clinical trials. And so, before I hand it over, Dr. Melvin?
So, good evening, everyone. Welcome you all for the InoRX Academy webinar series. Um, this evening, we are going to have two great speakers who will be speaking on the topics which are very happening topics. One is about diabetes care using novel smart devices. And for this, we have with us Dr. Anish Bashir. So, Dr. Anish Bashir is Professor of Internal Medicine at SRM Medical College, and he is also an adjunct professor at ICMR National Institute of Epidemiology. And he has received his MBBS from Trivandrum Medical College and his MD from JIPMER Pondicherry. And he's also a fellow of Royal College of Physicians at London and Edinburgh. And he's a principal investigator in several clinical trials, including ICMR DBT projects, and has also authored two textbooks of medicine for medical students. And his areas of expertise include systematic reviews, evidence-based medicine training, internal medicine, including infections, metabolic disorders, and snake bites. So, Dr. Anish will be speaking on a very relevant topic on the care of diabetic patients using smart medical devices. So, over to you, Dr. Anish.
Thank you, Dr. Melvin, for that kind introduction. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank InoRX as well as SRM Medical College Hospital and Research Center for this unique opportunity of speaking to all the audience about this very, very important happening, like you said, happening topic of relevance. So we know that we are now in an era of smart devices in most fields, not only in medicine, but also in other areas. Diabetes being one of the most prevalent diseases worldwide, it is no wonder that people are venturing into smart devices in this very important area. So why does it matter? What is the importance of smart devices in diabetes? What is the need? As all of us know, it is an increasingly prevalent disease among people now, with the disease occurring even at a very young age compared to what we used to have a few years or decades back. The importance of risk of hypoglycemia in this particular group of patients, that makes it very important to have something that helps us detect hypoglycemia, prevent hypoglycemia. The important factor of variability in glucose between patients, it does not remain the same for any one group of people. It keeps changing from patient to patient, irrespective of what medications they are on. And the very, very important limitations of the usual finger stick testing that all of us are aware of as health professionals. So in short, traditional devices that we have, like your finger stick testing, is generally something that gives you intermittent snapshots of the glucose homeostasis in the body, whereas smart devices portend a continuous decision support system that helps control diabetes much better. So that would be the best way to put this. So we'll just have an overview of what are the different types of smart devices that are currently available in the diabetes care initially, and then we will go on to the further nuances of this topic. So this, I'm sure many of you would recognize, is as a continuous glucose monitoring device, CGM, we call it in short, and it comes in two different types. One is the real-time CGM, which gives you a continuous streaming glucose level of the body, compared to an intermittently scanned CGM, where of course the sensor picks up the values, but you will have to scan the device intermittently to get your values. So So if you were asking what are the advantages, it basically measures interstitial blood glucose levels, so that invasive blood drawing and the delays associated with that is not required. It can measure the interstitial glucose levels. It provides trends over a period of time. So since it is continuously being monitored, you get a trend of the glucose values. Of course, can give alerts, especially the real-time CGM will give you alerts about hypoglycemia, very high blood sugars, and that can help in taking appropriate action in a timely manner. And the most important thing would be time in range, which has become very, very important over the last few years. And we now know that it is a much, more important measure of glucose control quality, variability, and hypoglycemia exposure than the glycosylated hemoglobin or glycated hemoglobin, which just tends to give you an average glucose value over the last 3 months or so. So these are some of the important things that one should know about CGM. And the major clinical uses is, of course, type 1 diabetes, because we we use insulin for this, and therefore it helps detect hypoglycemia and hypoglycemia risks at an early stage. Type 2 diabetics who are on insulin, of course, this is an important problem, so that we can use it for them. Sorry for the slide. Yes. The other major area where CGM is useful is in pregnancy, again, where you need a much more tighter control of the blood glucose for the sake of both the mother as well as the fetal outcomes. You would not want a lot of hypoglycemia, but at the same time, you would want to keep the blood sugar well within control, so that the baby is not affected by the adverse events of hyperglycemia. And finally, there is, of course, a group of people with hypoglycemia unawareness, particularly who have autonomic neuropathy. So where we would like to detect hypoglycemia using these alert systems. So the next thing is pens. Of course, pens have been in vogue for diabetes care for many years now, and although initially it was being used by only a few people because of the cost and other problems, but now it is becoming increasingly affordable to larger sections of diabetic populations. Now, the smart insulin pens have the versatility of being able to track doses of insulin, give you missed dose alerts, which is very important, especially if they are elderly and having cognitive decline, or are not able to remember the doses and all that. Timing reminders, again, as to when to take the dose, you can set them, and it very easily integrates with other apps on your smartphone or devices, so that you can use the insulin delivery much better. So the most important advantage of this insulin smart pens is that it improves insulin adherence. So as you have seen, like by giving alerts about the timing, about the doses, and about the missed doses, it obviously leads to insulin adherence in the long run. The other important device that has become increasingly being used by populations is insulin pumps. Again, due to the cost as well as concerns regarding how to use it, the initial apprehensions about infections, like or the difficulties associated with installing and removing and all that. But now, over the last few years, we are seeing a surge in the number of people who have being started to receive the insulin pumps much more commonly. And insulin pumps generally give you a continuous basal insulin delivery along with bolus dosing. So this tends to mimic physiological secretion from the pancreas, although not entirely, but it is close to that. So that is why they have become much popular. And there are three different types that are there. Standard pumps, which just deliver insulin. You can set the dose and it just delivers that dose. Whereas you have sensor augmented pumps, where you have a pump along with a sensor. So depending on the sensed glucose level, the insulin dose can be adjusted, but of course, you will have to do that manually. The dose has to be adjusted manually, but there is a sensor. And then there are hybrid closed loop systems where the sensor is again connected back to the pump so that it helps in directing the pump to deliver a desired dose of insulin depending on the glucose value that has been sensed. So these are the different types that are available. So the key takeaways is that as a clinician, try to recognize what pump type the patient is using among these. And the basal insulin is what is most important in these pumps. And it is an important thing to note that never stop basal insulin abruptly in any patient who is on a pump, because that is very, very important. Now, hybrid closed loop systems are the closest that we now have to something that we call as artificial pancreas, although it is not artificial pancreas in the real sense. Why? Because these closed loop systems, as you can see, it works by starting from detecting the continuous glucose levels using a CGM sensor, and then it uses an algorithm to detect the level of insulin, or determine the dose of insulin that is required to adjust to this level of glucose, and then it directs the pump to deliver that particular dose of insulin, and then this dose adjustment will bring down the blood sugar accordingly, and then again the CGM detects the blood glucose. So this is a cycle that goes on. The thing that we need to remember, why I said that it is closest to artificial pancreas and not really artificial pancreas, is because even in the current form of hybrid model that we have available worldwide, it is the basal insulin that is adjusted automatically, but the bolus doses during meals would have to be set by the person, and as well as you need to upload, or you need to input your calories or meals so that the dose is adjusted. So it is not a real artificial pancreas, as we are yet to reach that level of versatility. So, but the benefits of what is available so far, again, like CGM, it provides a better time in range of glucose, and reduced nocturnal hypoglycemia, because the basal insulin secretion gets reduced depending on the sensed blood glucose values. So you don't have to fear much about that. And of course, all these finally adding to a better glucose control in the person. So the key takeaway is that clinical supervision is still important, especially during intercurrent illness, surgery, or admissions in people who are on insulin pumps. So during these times, the entire homeostasis changes. Sensors may not detect the actual process that is going on, and the bolus doses might have to be adjusted accordingly. The basal insulin requirement may go up or come down depending on what is the type of illness that the patient is having. And finally, now we know that everything can be integrated into a smartphone or a small device like your Apple Watch or any of the smart watches of this digital ecosystem. So the app support can help in glucose tracking over a period of time. It can help in dose calculation and trend interpretation, again over a period of time, because you have a lot of values accumulating which can be interpreted. Remote monitoring, especially for type 1 diabetes, for parents who are not at home and whose kids are on these devices, you can do remote monitoring. Or even for very elderly people who are at home, their caregivers can do this remote monitoring. And tele-diabetes care for patients who are not able to visit the physician directly. So these are some of the areas where the apps can come into help to support the control of diabetes. So this is another infographic that gives you a very bird's eye view of what all different types of integrated app related as well as smart device related diabetes care can be delivered. So you can use the AI for analyzing the data that is obtained using these monitorings, like the smartphone, smartwatch, or the computer. So the data from a continuous glucose monitor, or an infusion, or the insulin pump, all these systems can be stored in an online platform, and then the monitoring platform can be seen by a website or an app, and then that can analyze and give you recommendations for improved glycemic control. So all these are possible with the current uh, armamentarium of smart devices that we have. So now, what are the implications for hospital practice for these devices? Most of these are used as an outpatient or a home care kind of diabetes management, if you would agree with me. But there are some implications for hospital practice as well, like when a patient with a continuous glucose monitor or a pump visits the hospital, what are the things that, no, it might be a visit just for something unrelated, or it might be a visit for his glycemic control. So, as a physician or as a doctor, what are we supposed to do? The do's are to find out what is the type of device from the patient, to check the last calibration of the device, because that is very important. Otherwise, the results or the data may be erroneous or outdated. Then, and also confirm what is the insulin delivery mode. Is it a simple pump, or is it a hybrid model, or so kind of, or a sensor augmented device? The don'ts, as I said, do not attempt to remove the pump unnecessarily unless it is an important no requirement, like a surgery or something like that. Never ignore alerts. Try to interpret the alerts, especially hypoglycemia alerts, and for time in range alerts. And also, don't try to switch abruptly to sliding scale insulin. You can always adjust the basal insulin. Never stop the basal insulin completely. You can, of course, adjust the doses, and the bolus can also be adjusted accordingly. So there are some conditions where you might want to stop the, or remove the pump, and put the patient on other types of insulin infusions, and which are required in the hospital, like a diabetic ketoacidosis or a major surgery. And a very severe infection, patient is on multiple inotropes. So these are some of the indications where you can gently go ahead and do that. So this is what I was saying. So when device interruption is reasonable, when patient is undergoing MRI, of course, reasons you are already aware of. When they come with a deep diabetic ketoacidosis, a major surgery, or hemodynamic instability, because there the blood pressure is low, and of course your interstitial blood sugar values may not correlate at all with your actual blood glucose values. And so these kind of conditions, it might be reasonable to interrupt your device. So for junior doctors, what are the three major CGM parameters that you will look for when somebody comes to you who is using a device? One is time in range, because that is very, very important. And if you see the current evidence, it says that, like, if you increase your time in range by 10%, it can reduce microvascular complication risks significantly. And as you will see in this small graphic, that most recommendations are for keeping time in range more than 70% of the time, and 25 less than 25% of the time in a range of more than 180. And I'm sorry for that part which is not visible. It is in the range of less than 70. We accept for less than 4% of the time, and even less than 1% of the time below 54 milligram per deciliter. So these are the targets or the goals for time and range for diabetic patients. So it is good to have an awareness of these. As you are now looking at HbA1c, please be aware of these goals also, because you are likely to see more and more patients come with CGM devices, and so you must be aware of what all to check for. And the trend arrows, how the trend of blood sugar is over a period of time, and the hypoglycemia alerts, because that will help you to adjust the doses, and also the basal as well as the bolus doses. So the advantages of smart devices, as all of you would agree, improved glycemic control because of the several reasons that we have mentioned: the time in range control, as well as the avoidance of hypoglycemia. So lower incidence of hypoglycemia, better adherence over a period of time, because patients understand that their blood glucose is remaining in range, as well as there are no bitter experiences due to hypoglycemia, and the the ping pong effect of hyperglycemia. Those bitter experiences are not there. And remote monitoring is possible if you really want to do that. And of course, the patients feel empowered because they are in control of their diabetes. They are able to adjust the doses. They are able to manage diabetes by themselves. So you can expect much more cooperation from the patients regarding the management of diabetes. But of course, there are limitations, and in a country like ours, cost, of course, is the most important one. Diabetes being a long-term condition that needs management over over the entire lifespan of the individual, probably. Although we have diabetes remission and all being talked about, but that can be achieved in only a very small percentage of the population right now. So people will need to spend out of the pocket for a long time. So cost is an important factor for these devices. Of course, many of them have been off patent and the device costs have come down considerably, but still it remains an important limitation. Calibration issues, again, if you don't have the idea about that, and if it is not done regularly, it might affect um, the values as well as how your diabetes is being managed. Sensor lag is possible, and again, because it is only detecting your interstitial glucose and not the actual glucose in your blood, there is still going to be some difference between these values. But of course, most of the devices now come with an accuracy of like somewhere around less than 10%. So like the difference between the actual blood glucose and your interstitial glucose is like, if it is less than 10%, then it is fine to use those devices, is what is currently recommended. But of course, you can have different problems in that. And for especially for elderly people and others with problems, especially with memory and all that, there's a bit of a learning curve with the as with any device or an app or a new technology. Device malfunction issues, of course, like any other device. So these are some generic problems, not specific to smart devices in diabetes alone. So apart from that, I think if you look at the overall picture, it helps control diabetes much better than what we are doing right now. And of course, if the person is affordable and can have it, the risk offsets is offsetted by the benefits of using it. So what lies ahead? So it is not going to stop with what devices we have right now, as you all know, because there is a revolution happening in devices all over the world, especially in India, with the push for devices and technology. So in the near future, people are likely to see AI guided insulin dosages, wearable multi-parameter sensors, non-invasive glucose monitoring, where even the small needle is not required, fully closed loop pancreas systems, like we said, a truly artificial pancreas where even the bolus and the basal insulins can be managed by the system, even without inputting the data on calories or meals and all that. So these will be some things that we can look forward to in the near future, and it would be very exciting to see how these unfold. So finally, I'll end with a small case vignette. A 25-year-old man with type 1 diabetes on insulin pump is admitted with acute diarrhea. What should you do? You could type your responses in the chat box if you want. We could, discuss this during the Q&A also. And to summarize, smart devices improve safety and glycemic control, but of course at a cost. And there is a lot of patient empowerment that comes along with the proper use of these devices. And in the near future, currently, like how you all are using HbA1c and other parameters of blood glucose control, CGM interpretation will have to become a basic skill that everybody knows. And never stop pump basal insulin abruptly. And you can use the smart device data to continuously guide your treatment decisions. So I would leave with this and will be happy to take a few questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anish. That was a really a very crisp presentation, highlighting the basics and also where we stand today with respect to utilizing all these smart devices for diabetes care. So I request all the members, all the attendees to put their questions in the chat box. So while they're typing their questions, I just have one question, Anish, to ask you, and that is, which are the patients who are most likely to need a smart device, let's say like a CGM kind of device, considering that a lot of the patients who are having who are diabetic have other even more fundamental issues like affordability is an issue and adherence is also an issue. So keeping all this in mind, who are the people? It appears that it's going to be a very niche group of people who will really be using this device, right? In a context like in a country like India.
Yes, yeah, yes, Melvin, you are very right about that, and that's why I said so. These benefits of devices come at a cost, and of course, that cost is not no very small. Right now, I think it cannot be universal. Of course, that everybody will agree. And among the two types of CGM, the real-time one and the intermittent scan type, probably the real-time CGM would be best suited for somebody who is type 1 diabetes with very brittle sugars, who is very difficult to control on the usual basal bolus regime that we are following. Because no, you try to increase 2 units, then they go into hypoglycemia. If you start lowering the sugars, they go in insulin, they go into hyperglycemia. So that is one subset. The brittle diabetes people probably is the one who are most likely to benefit from real-time CGM. The other would be somebody like people with advanced CKD and others who are having recurrent hypoglycemia. Again, that very one small subset of people. And we also have one group which is having hypoglycemia unawareness, because they go into hypoglycemia but no idea that they really have hypoglycemia. So these would be probably the three important groups. For type 2 diabetes, maybe real-time CGM is not going to be an important choice right now, especially in India. Probably the intermittent scanned CGM is good for them, in those whom we find it difficult to achieve control despite all the medications. So that would be my take on that.
Yes, yeah, thank you. I think that is very beautifully put, that we have certain specific subset of participants like brittle diabetes and even people who are in type 2 diabetic but who are not really achieving control because of the very labile kind of scenarios with recurrent hypoglycemia events. So another issue about this medical devices in diabetic care is how common do we hear from patients issues where they talk about over alerts, uh, patients coming up with when they're not really going into hypoglycemia, but the device kind of gives it that it's hypoglycemic, even though they don't feel any hypoglycemic symptoms. So are these things quite common?
Not very common, especially with the standard devices that are available right now. And if they're calibrated well and regularly, it shouldn't be a problem. So it occurs in a very minority of people, and I think that is why when they visit the hospital, we should check the calibration when it was done last, and have a look at the alerts. So that it helps them. And it might sometimes be also a problem with how the way the alerts have been set. So that can also be adjusted if it becomes a big problem. So it is we have not seen that much of a problem with these over
Okay,
alerts.
thank you. And one question from Dr. Arun. Compared to global data, how robust is the evidence base for CGM use in India? And do you see as the key gaps in the current research?
Yes. Again, it's a very important question and a very useful one for discussion, because I think just because these devices have not become quite popular in many parts of India, we don't really have much data on that. The largest cohort of data probably comes from the south in most of the cases. Like we have some centers in Kerala and Tamil Nadu where there is a significant number of people on CGM for the past decade or more. It is their data that we have, particularly on CGMs and insulin pumps. So there is, I would rather say, rather than scarcity of data, it is the representativeness of the data which is lacking, because there are quite a few published studies from the south, particularly from Trivandrum and from Chennai, regarding these devices. But up north and probably the central part of India, as well as the remote areas, we don't have much data because, of course, it has not become popular in those areas. And I think if you ask me what is the key gap, it would be more of representative people in the representativeness of the country in terms of population involved, as well as these specific subsets, particularly pregnancy and this hypoglycemia unawareness people and labile diabetics. So the data in those may be very scarce in our country.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Anish. It was really a very insightful session. Glad to see that a lot of participants, I'm surely would have benefited from this interaction. So looking forward to hear from you, Anish, in future sessions also when we have InoRX webinar series. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Have a nice day. Thank you.
Good day. So without wasting much time, we'll go to the next webinar of our program today, and that is important session about how clinical trials are managed in obesity and diabetes. We all know right now that there are a number of drugs available in the market, GLP analogs, GLP drugs, and these drugs are making waves all over the world. They are changing economies. In fact, for a short while, I believe it even overshot the economy of one of the countries of origin. And so we have with us a very seasoned and renowned expert in this field, Dr. Shahid Akhtar with us, who's also my good friend. I'm happy to introduce him. Hello, Shahid.
Hello.
Yeah. So, to formally introduce Dr. Shahid, Dr. Shahid is a globally experienced physician leader with over 15 years of expertise spanning clinical development, medical affairs, medical devices, and real world evidence, having operated across country, regional, global headquarters, and serving the world's most complex and diverse healthcare environments. At Novo Nordisk, he has been leading a team of 70 plus clinical research physicians and scientists delivering pivotal trials across cardiometabolic diseases, including semaglutide programs, MASH, and next generation dual and triple agonist projects targeting type 2 diabetes and obesity. With hands on regulatory experience across FDA, EMA, and beyond, and a career built at the intersection of science, strategy, and truly global operations, Dr. Shahid brings a rare frontline and truly global operations, and his insights into the challenges of running multinational trials in some of today's most scientifically exciting therapeutic areas. A medical postgraduate from JIPMER Pondicherry with executive education from INSET and London School of Economics, he's passionate about one thing, and that is turning great science into better outcomes for patients everywhere. So we are so happy to have you with us this evening, Shahid. So over to you.
Well, Melvin, thank you so much. If we could just go back, please. Yeah, and I hope I'm audible to you as well. Well, it's a complex topic that you have asked me to present on, and in 20 or 25 minutes that you have allocated me, it's a little difficult to do justice. So I'll rush through some of the slides, and we can take questions as towards end, and if something is not clear, please feel free to ask. Here are some of my disclosures. So I am an employee of Novo Nordisk, but in today's session, whatever I present, it's based on publicly available data, and my presentation are my own, and they do not necessarily reflect the positions, strategies, or opinion of Novo Nordisk or any of its affiliates. Any discussion of products, services, or research is for informational purposes only and do not constitute medical, legal, or financial advice. So these are the disclosure, and then let's quickly get started. Can I have the next one, please? Yes. So obesity is no longer just a pandemic. Like Melvin mentioned, it's also one of the growth engines driving clinical trials, and a lot of research is happening around this field. Just to give you some context, numbers speak for themselves. So we do have a billion plus patients or adults living with obesity worldwide, and this data is pretty recent. There are many more adults who are projected to be obese by 2035. These projections come from the World Obesity Atlas, again from the last year or so. And that leads to a big increase in the rise of obesity globally. This calls for action, and the action has been initiated by many drug manufacturers, research labs, as well as physicians' bodies who have recognized obesity as a disease, a chronic disease that warrants long term treatment. And with the advent of some really successful molecules, the race has been quite charming, if that's the least to say. And there are many drugs in development, active development today, and not many of them, of course, would make it to the phase 3 program, but then there are quite a few drugs in development. And if we go on to the next one, let me just tell you, when we are designing these clinical trials, and a lot that I'm going to present to you from a global perspective, and when I say global, a large part of it is determined by what the US FDA expects from you. So these trials, the global multinational trials, the big ones that you get to see in an NEGM or Lancet publications, are phase 3 trials primarily intended towards regulatory submissions and aimed at answering the questions US FDA would expect you to answer. So if we just have a short glimpse of what these trials could be fundamentally associated with. So the design, it's almost always the RCT, that's the golden design, and it could depend on what phase we are talking about. Typically, if you're talking about a phase 3, warrants at least 52 weeks, and plus there should be an extension period. Statistical considerations are very important. They recommend inclusion of analysis using the treatment policy estimate. We can touch about it in the Q&A. Decentralized or hybrid trials are becoming commonplace in some settings. They are not really a regulatory requirement, but they are adopted for boosting retentions. As you can see, long trials, 52 weeks, that's almost a year. You do need retention strategies in place. Real world evidence is not purely regulatory in nature, but that data is required by health technology assessors or payers who eventually have to make policy decisions whether to reimburse a drug or not. It's very common in the West, it's not so common in out of pocket markets in many other parts of the world. The right-hand panel is pretty self-explanatory. Depending on the phase of progression, you could have different objectives, and accordingly, the period of your trials could differ. Today, we are going to focus primarily on the phase 3 trials. These are also known as the pivotal trials, the regulatory trials for submission, like I mentioned, and these could sometimes involve up to thousands more patients in the cohorts. So let's move on to the next one, please. A large part of what I'm going to speak to you comes from the guidance to the industry provided by the US FDA. We call it as the Obesity and Overweight Developing Drugs and Biological Products of Weight Reduction. Now, this almost always stays in a draft format. What happens though, the industry is strictly bound to adhere to the requirements, and whenever there's a doubt or you would like to do something different, it's warranted that you have a prior discussion and an agreement with the US FDA before you can proceed. I've also put in a couple of snapshots here because this is how the US FDA defines underweight, normal, overweight, obesity, class 1, class 2, and extreme obesity cases. So these are the BMI cutoffs that we have to adhere to. And I'm mentioning this because they have reasons for doing so. They believe that when you do these trials, when you expose a large number of patients to an investigational medicine product or the placebo in a trial, then you must be looking at addressing people who live with obesity, where you can expect complications. That's usually class 1 obesity, 30 kg meter square or above, or they need to be in a range of 27 kg per meter square BMI with at least one comorbidity. That could be type 1 diabetes, apologies, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, dyslipidemia, so on and so forth. So these cutoffs are pretty stringent. These are pretty clear cut. I'm aware the definition of a BMI or rather obesity or overweight and the BMI cutoffs could be different in certain different geographies, but these are usually the global recommendations that are followed. And so come the efficacy endpoints. Again, it's very clearly defined by the US FDA what you have to measure and how you have to measure. So there could be the primary efficacy endpoint, which is almost always the mean percentage change from body weight in the investigational drug group versus the control group, and often the control group is a placebo control group. And you could have secondary endpoints like blood pressure, lipoprotein lipids, fasting glucose, A1C, especially if you're including people with type 2 diabetes in your trials. Good. Can we move on? Yeah. So, like I mentioned, here are some primary endpoints that we often adhere to, and the percentage of body weight loss is the most important one. There are also some discussions around responder rates, but that has changed slightly in the new guidance. In the new guidance from Jan 2025 onwards, they are rather looking at what percentage of patients lose weight uh, at, at, at certain magnitude, like 5%, 10%, 15%, 20%, or even 25%. So those things need to be defined. A waist circumference is another important parameter that's often included, BMI reduction and responder rate, like I mentioned to you. So these are required in FDA drug submissions. The secondary and safety endpoints are mostly related to cardiometabolic markers because these days we are talking about cardiometabolic medicine and obesity, type 2 diabetes, MASH. They're all considered to be spectrums of the same disorder in one way or other. Uh, since we had the SELECT trial, which was a large multinational cardiovascular outcome trial in people with obesity who demonstrated a reduction in MACE, which is major adverse cardiovascular event. Since then, having a cardiovascular benefit or demonstrating cardiovascular safety or benefit has become commonplace. Glycemic markers could be included, especially in patients who are at metabolic risk or with type 2 diabetes. PROs are very important. In fact, the regulators and certainly the health technology assessors do ask for PROs later in the course of events, but you are required to include PROs even for your submission files. Of course, adverse events have to be monitored very closely, and there are several safety endpoints that you need to have. Good. Next one, please. So that brings me to an important question that we have been trying to, or that was supposed to be one of the core topics for discussion today about the key challenges. Now, that primarily comes from finding the right patients, recruiting them, and retaining them. And in some of these trials, we are looking at metabolism of individuals. The challenges could be multifaceted. Some of them could be the stigma around weight and diet disclosure. That, of course, is still a deterrent. Sometimes the placebo arm dropout happens when no visible improvement is seen. So the patient is not motivated enough, feels like, what am I doing in a trial when I'm not getting any improvement or a visible improvement is not happening. With the advent of very important GLP-1 molecules, there has been um, a lot of patients have been put on these drugs lately. The GLP-1 market has become very saturated in certain geographies, and that certainly competes with trial participation. Sometimes you have to bring in patients who have never been on a GLP-1 or who have a GLP-1 treatment washout period of 3 months, 9 months, or sometimes even 12 months. Where to find those patients? Of course, in out-of-pocket markets and where the GLP-1 penetration is still not very high, you can find those patients. But in the Western world, it is becoming increasingly challenging to find them, especially around tertiary care centers or big metropolises. In the US, it's a very important context that's about underrepresentation of minorities. And the US FDA has very specific guidance on how to make your trial population diverse, including specific cutoffs and guidances on where these patients come from, thereby trying to ensure the data is representative, the population you have included in your trial is representative of the diversity they have in the US. And sometimes frequent visit burdens are also a challenge, especially for people who are obese and those who may have to travel long distances to reach the site or the clinical trial center. Some of the proven strategies that have worked and still do work are community-based sites where you can have mobile units. We have tried it in certain geographies. For example, in Sao Paulo in Brazil, it might take 2 hours for a patient to travel from their home to a clinical trial center under normal traffic circumstances. I would imagine it's also the case in many parts of our country, and it's also a very common thing in many geographies. Decentralized components like wearables, apps, home visits, they are pretty effective. They reduce visit burdens and the no-show rates. In fact, many investigators these days are asking the sponsors to have wearables, apps, and home visits or even telephonic visits to substitute for mandatory face-to-face visits in a clinic. Well, culturally competent staff, needless to say, it's very important because we are dealing with a metabolic disease, and we are dealing with people who would have certain dietary habits, who would like to have a stigma-free language when you communicate to them. And of course, the right or appropriate equipment is sometimes needed when you are measuring some of the endpoints. And then finally, digital is growing by leaps and bounds, and it could still take time, but again, it is gaining ground, certainly when it comes to decentralized trials and digital engagement of patients. The next one, please. Good. So, having spent some time on what we have been talking, essentially, you would see that the number of trials that the industry is performing, or in general, obesity trials per year have been increasing. And there's a linear growth, if you could see from what it started in 2016, 2022 period, and there's been a rapid increase in the last 2 or 3 years. This data comes from global data trials intelligence and independent body monitoring the number of trials in different therapy areas. And on the right-hand side, you see some of the regulatory essentials, like you have your IND application, you go for your IRB approval, you define your endpoint thresholds, you look at cardiovascular safety. Like I mentioned, in the post-select era, cardiovascular outcomes have become increasingly important and often expected. So it's important that the sponsor or the investigators plan for a MACE tracking. MACE stands for major adverse cardiovascular events, the same that you see in cardiovascular diseases or in cardiovascular outcome trials with type 2 diabetes. Now, these are becoming increasingly important, and at least the MACE tracking has to be a part of your submission. Then BMI plus adiposity criteria are also becoming important. In some geographies, in certain populations, now there's a demand to include DEXA or DXA, either through and that is really becoming or is destined to become one of the gold standards going forward. GLP-1 washout period, I briefly alluded to it. It's very important and depends on what kind of patient you would like to enroll in your trial. Generally, those who have not been exposed to a GLP-1 therapy prior to inclusion in the trial are a more naive population, thereby they are a more clean population to demonstrate the effects of an investigational product. Good. I'll be quick with this one because we have been discussing more or less these points together. But what you have seen that a homogeneous population is sometimes very easy to get, but you can always ask: is it the right population to enroll in a study because you would like the results to be more generalizable, thereby the real world use could be more effective. BMI as the sole eligibility criteria is being called into question, and there could be different ways of looking at the patient population that you define to be included in a trial. Ignoring the GLP-1 background use is an important risk, and that should be considered whenever you are designing a trial. Inadequate follow-up duration is very important. At least 52 weeks is mandatory or warranted when you are looking at your pivotal trials for a regulatory submission. Of course, it could be extended to another 52 weeks where you might have open label design, or you might just be monitoring long-term side effects. In some of the other diseases where you bring in patients with type 2 diabetes, for example, you can always question the sole reliance on A1C. Poor retention infrastructure is also very critical when it comes to retaining patients in a trial, and this could lead to several challenges as well. The next one, please. Yep. So I would like to mention very briefly that there are certain trends that you might want to watch. You have seen a progressive increase in weight reduction potential with different treatments. Now we are talking about dual and triple agonists, and this is going to be very important. Though oral agents are pretty good, and they have been approved in many countries, especially in the US. They are important for certain patients and for adherence purposes, but then they certainly do not have the highest weight loss potentials. Like I mentioned earlier, 300 plus GLP-1 based treatments are in progress, and AI is being used a lot in trial designs these days. You'll see more of it coming. There's also guidance in place so that you can make the right decisions. And especially in if you involve patients with metabolic disorders like like type 2 diabetes, you might want to have more composite endpoints that includes A1C, TIR, and PROs. So these are some of the elements to keep in mind when these trials are being designed. Yeah, I would skip this one because it's more of a summary in interest of time. Yeah, this is very important. So we have been talking about the regulators. We have been talking about health technology assessment. We have been talking about sponsors. As a medical doctor, what is very close to my heart is what it means to the patient. Now, these days we are chasing a high potential weight loss for the products that are put into trials. If you look at what it means when someone loses 25% weight, or 25% of their total body weight. For example, if you look at it in an US context, someone who is 96 kgs ends up being at 70 kgs. 32 BMI becomes 23. The waist circumference reduces from 108 to 86 centimeters or 34 inches. And as a result of it, someone has to go for a new pants size. Now, this is just one way to demonstrate that a lot goes on in the lives of the patients. The look and feel changes. So it also warrants that these patients should be considered, their life has to be considered, their participation in clinical trials has to be considered, because what the drug can do to them and what kind of lifestyle changes they may have to work on to still live a reasonably good life, but it might mean they have to adopt several changes in the way they live and go about their daily lives. So it's important that we find the right patients, and that's my next slide. Yeah, so these patients should be pretty motivated so that they administer the drug. They have a desire to lose weight, or at least they have a motivation to be on the medication, even if they have lost their desired amount of weight. They should be committed to be an active participant and attend the visits, even if they suspect they are on placebo and they are not gaining much. They should be, of course, motivated to fill in some of the requirements of the study and be aware of potential side effects and what can be done to manage those. Good. I would like to just conclude by one final slide, and that's the key takeaway slide. A lot of people are living with obesity globally, and that number is destined to keep on increasing. The FDA imposes drug thresholds when you design clinical trials for regulatory submissions, and these numbers are well documented in their guidance to the industry. Primary endpoint is almost often the percentage body weight loss, cardiovascular outcomes, or cardiometabolic markers, and PROs are also sometimes key endpoints. We must aim to recruit from community-based sites. There should be diversity targets, and decentralized designs are emerging practices. We should look at how the market is responding to GLP-1 treatment, GLP-1 based treatment. Thereby, we should be mindful where do we find the right patients and enroll them in the trials. And finally, if you have one source that I can guide you to, it's the 2025 FDA guidance on how we design clinical trial, or how the industry designs clinical trials, what's the gold standard, and how you go about your business from the getting the IND to the regulatory submission, thereby to have a product that benefits not only the sponsors but also the patients at scale. Well, that's my last slide. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Shahid. Your session was really very crisp. The way you took us through the different aspects of what the regulators expect from an obesity trial. I don't think people will be having much questions, but still, I thought I'll just ask a few. So we're talking about many many obesity drugs having weight loss of 10%, 15%, 20% these days. So have the trials which are presently being planned, are those trials, is there a basic expectation that now that we have such effective drugs, the minimum level of weight loss that is expected to be achieved is increased now to 15 kg or 10 kg instead of the bare minimum of 5 kg that we used to see those days? So
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's not in absolute terms, but it's a percentage of your body weight loss. And excuse me. So the important question is, why would you bring a product to the market with a potential that is not as good as the previous one? Now, what is being targeted these days are high potency drugs with less side effects, or trying to reduce the body weight without affecting the quality of body weight loss. Right, but the numbers keep on increasing. Like liraglutide, 5 to 10% was enough. Sema brought the standard beyond 15%, and now tirzepatide is doing it over 20% or more. So the next generation of products, of course, have to be either as good as tirzepatide with certain other benefits, or better than tirzepatide in their weight lowering potential. So that's how it works. Otherwise, nobody would fund a project where you don't have significant weight loss potential. That number is going to increase, probably be as good as bariatric surgery in a way. If that's a comparator, of course, nobody is designing trials to compare bariatric surgery with a GLP-1, especially for a regulatory submission. But that's how it's being done today.
Thank you, Shahid. And are the regulators are also expecting data from the manufacturers, especially after patients stop these drugs? What happens? What are the effects of what happens to the body weight? What happens to their general metabolism subsequent to stopping the drugs? Is there an expectation on manufacturers to provide that kind of data?
Yes and no. That's primarily on the side effects side, where you're mandated to monitor patients for a longer period of time. We are all taught in the first lesson in pharmacology. Melvin, I remember you did teach me that drugs don't work when you don't take them. So So it's very simple. If you don't take these drugs, then they stop working, just like any other medication for any other chronic disease. What they are looking for during the conduct of these trials, so when you design a phase 3 trial, they are asking for two different kinds of analysis, or rather two different kinds of endpoints, if you may. They call it as the treatment policy estimand, and they call it the trial product estimand. I'll explain to you very briefly what it is. So first of all, estimand is like what exactly we are trying to measure. And when we talk about the treatment policy estimand, it's essentially what happens if we assign people to this treatment, no matter what they do afterwards. So you have patients enrolled in the trial, they stop taking treatment, they skip doses, or they may even switch to another therapy or have a rescue medication. So this is more real world like, and they would like you to present the data. The other one is something known as trial product estimand, or the ideal use effect. So this demonstrates the true or the full potential of a drug, where you often adjust or account for treatment discontinuations or switching treatments. So essentially, what you are looking at is, if this drug was given in an ideal scenario, what could happen. So they want you to demonstrate both. If patients use it in a more real world like fashion, what is the effect, which is usually lower than the full potential of the drug, which is measured by the other one that I mentioned, the trial product estimate. So this is, they are certainly asking for, and this needs to be included in your trial.
Okay, thank you, Shahid. We have a few questions from the audience. So I'll first take up questions which are directly related to the presentation. So in event-driven studies, event-driven MACE studies particularly, how do sponsors determine the optimal event cutoff to support marketing authorization? And what strategies are most effective in ensuring patients remain for the sustained duration of follow-up until that point?
Yeah, so of course these cutoffs are decided based on historical data or the MACE monitoring, like I mentioned. It's not the absolute risk that we go for, but rather the relative risk. And based on statistical analysis, you have to demonstrate a significant reduction in the relative risk. Now, how do the numbers come from? Of course, it depends on the background data, just like you would design any other trial. But you have to sit down with the regulators here, the FDA, and agree with them the data you bring in for calculating your sample size, and of course the kind of patients you would like to enroll in a particular study. Even within cardiovascular outcome trials, the patient population could significantly be different. For example, if you are including those with where you are aiming primary prevention, i.e., they never had a cardiovascular event, and you want to demonstrate that the drug can prevent the first event, then your sample size would be significantly higher, because it's a population that has never experienced any. Now, if you're talking about a population where you are targeting secondary prevention, i.e., somebody had a cardiovascular event and you want to prevent the next event from happening, then these are more serious populations, these are more diseased population, and the the statistics or the probability of anticipating the next event happening in this population is significantly higher. So thereby you might need lower number of patients. So you have to sit down with the FDA, you have to discuss what kind of population you are planning to enroll, because that determines the kind of regulatory submission or the label approval you will ask for the US FDA, and accordingly you design your sample size and what needs to be done. Who measures these events? Of course, the sponsor cannot do it in isolation. We have what we call as the DMCs, or data monitoring committees, who are independent, who can look at the data, and who are the final judges. So the sponsors are mostly blinded to some of these endpoints. So it's the DMC that is empowered to make those decisions.
Yes. Thank you, Shahid. So, yeah, now we go to other questions related to these drugs. So, there's a question from Deepa Lakshmi who wants to know what are the chances of people getting hypoglycemic episodes when they are on these drugs, particularly if they're non-diabetic obese patients?
Non-diabetic obese patients getting hypoglycemia from a GLP-1 therapy based therapy is very limited. I cannot say it's not there at all, because there's nothing like absolute in biological medicine. We all know that. But if somebody is not a diabetic and is not on any concomitant treatment like sulfonylurea or insulin, then the rates of hypoglycemia are almost negligible, because it goes back to the mechanism of action, how these drugs work. They work only when the sugar levels are high, and in a normal glycemic individual, they may not have any glucose lowering effect.
Okay. And the last question, Shahid, is from Sven Verghese, who wants to know what is your take on semaglutide losing its patent, and now a lot of we have a lot of biosimilars for semaglutide in the Indian market, especially this happened last week. So, what is your take on the access of these drugs to a lot of patients in India? So, any of your thoughts on this?
Yes, so I cannot answer on behalf of the company. I'm not authorized to. So what I'm going to share here is my own personal opinion. It's good for the patients. So far, there have been only one or two manufacturers, and how much of the medicine can they manufacture? When you have many people here, then you certainly have more no more drugs in the market, thereby increasing the access patients have to these very good molecules that have been tested in thousands of patients. Semaglutide happens to be the most tested peptide of all time. So you are exposing patients to a drug that has been tested well and tested in many, in a very diverse population. So it's a good thing for the treatment of obesity and for the treatment of those patients who need these treatments. Of course, the caveat here remains, whether the right patients get treated or anybody who believes that they need to be treated goes and accesses these drugs. Yeah. We shouldn't forget they are medicines that have to be prescribed by a registered medical practitioner.
Yeah, that is very well said, Shahid. As you rightly said, I think these are very essential drugs that need to be there for a lot of patients, especially those who are obese, who are at a high risk for cardiovascular disease, and who currently do not have any options. These are definitely going to be something that would potentially even reduce the risk of MACE, besides reducing weight loss. And finally, I would like to also add one thing, Shahid, about this whole concept of the anti-obesity trials leading to the having drugs with a very high ceiling. So I think the stage is all set for having a number of drugs in the coming years, where we are going to see weight loss of nothing less than 20 to 25%, especially with drugs like retatrutide and tirzepatide. So it's something, the stage is very well set, and not only it's obesity that is going to be benefit. Obesity is not Besides obesity, we are also going to see a lot of obesity related comorbidities that are also going to be taken care. Particularly, we're talking about MASH, we're talking about obstructive sleep apnea, we're talking about heart disease and osteoarthritis. So definitely, this is going to make a big impact. So GLP analogs are something that is definitely going to make a big impact in the years ahead. So thank you so much, Shahid, for giving your valuable time this evening and educating all of us. It was really enlightening to listen to you, and I'm sure the audience has been benefited through your interactions. I now hand over the time to Aliza for closing the session.
Thank you. Okay, hi everybody. I hope you enjoyed both of our sessions, and thank you so much to our speakers for joining us today and sharing all their insights. It was definitely a very amazing webinar between both of them. So I'm going to just share a slide of what's to come so that you guys can register for our upcoming webinars that we've got. And here they are. Okay, so coming up next for April, we've got a really great one, choice of endpoints in oncology trials. So we'll be sending out information on how to register for those. And then coming soon, we have 2 other webinars, and we'll keep you guys all informed. Everyone that participated today will be receiving a certificate of completion. So we really appreciate you attending. And if there are any other questions, please feel free to email us at hello@inorx.com. I've added that into the chat window as well, and we'll see you on the next webinar. Thank you so much, everybody.
Bye, Lisa. Thank you.
Good night, everyone.